This is vital to its ability to make sound economic decisions free from the political pressures of an election cycle, is what their little scam was for us. And that allowed this fourth branch of government, so-called, to exist, just so that we can have more financial security. Now, the court found that Congress has the authority to restrict removals depending on the character of the office, which is weird because where does the office live and where's that in the Constitution? Now, Trump uses the nickname too late and that because they say that he's been too slow to lower the interest rates. Oh, thank you for that explanation. A battle inside the Federal Reserve. This is Lisa Cook. You may know her as the person who says she lives primarily in two separate locations, which is a pretty amazing feat. But now she is suing the president for firing her. And she's not just suing Trump, she's suing Jerome Powell, which means we got a little bit of internal battle going on. And this is going to be curious because if Jerome Powell doesn't work with Trump and Trump is vindicated, then Jerome Powell might be enabling someone who should not be in the office doing work. And that means that Jerome Powell is complicit in this criminality, and that is cause for removal. Woo! So he's in a little spicy spot here. Here's what they write into the court: suing Trump, suing Jerome Powell, suing the Board of Governors. And there's some fun stuff here because she got fired and we get a little trip down memory lane. On the evening of August 25th, President Trump turned to his social media account on True Social and he fired Lisa Cook. Right, we read it. This followed his August 20th call for her to resign based on nothing more than another social media posting. This one came from Bill Pulte, who we just saw, who said there's even more evidence of crimes or malfeasance, who has been using his office to allege mortgage wrongdoing against other public officials. I think he's doing other things. I mean, one of the things he has to do is manage federal housing and the loans and Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae and all these things. So it's kind of within his jurisdiction. What are you mad about? The operational, here you go, independence. And it's interesting they put that word operational. Okay, that's a modifier. They can't say that the Federal Reserve is independent. That's going to be damning to their case. So they say, no. Of course, it's still under the executive branch, but operationally, the executive branch can't control it. So is it really under the executive branch then, or what? So they say this is vital to its ability to make sound economic decisions free from the political pressures of an election cycle, is what their little scam was for us. And that allowed this fourth branch of government, so-called, to exist, just so that we can have more financial security and more fiscal responsibility. All right, you get the point. Federal Reserve does nothing, right? It's a joke. This case challenges President Trump's unprecedented and illegal attempt to remove Governor Cook from her position, which, if allowed, would be the first of its kind in the board's history, which is why we're excited about it. It would subvert the Federal Reserve Act, which is illegal, which explicitly requires a showing of cause for a governor's removal, like mortgage fraud's a pretty good one, which an unsubstantiated allegation about private mortgage applications submitted by Cook prior to her Senate confirmation is not. Okay, the fact that she lied before she came in, and there's no denial here. This is always so funny. It's like, will you deny it? Unsubstantiated allegation. That's not true. They could add that in there, but they did not. An unsubstantiated allegation that is unequivocally false about private mortgage. They didn't say that. They said it's just unsubstantiated. Well, that's because we're just warming up. And it's, by the way, we see the pictures of your signature, lawyers, but this is not good enough. Now, the president's actions violate Cook's Fifth Amendment due process rights and her statutory right to notice and a hearing under the Federal Reserve Act. So she needs due process, just like Kilmar does. Accordingly, Governor Cook seeks immediate declaratory and injunctive relief to confirm her status as a member of the Board of Governors, safeguard her and the board's congressionally mandated independence, which is illegal. It can't be independent from oversight of the executive, and allow Governor Cook and the Federal Reserve to continue its critical work. Now, we know who the parties are. Lisa Cook, you know who she is, Trump, and Jerome. He's being sued in his official capacity to the extent that Jerome has any ability to take any action to effectuate Trump's purported termination of her. Since its establishment in 1913, which was under Woodrow Wilson, the worst president ever, Congress intended for the Federal Reserve System to function independent of political interference, but they didn't amend the Constitution. Now, as articulated in the Supreme Court in Wilcox versus Trump, they wrote this back in 2025. They say, and we saw this, remember, because in the Sela Law case versus the CFBP, we saw that Trump fired somebody, they sued, said you can't sue, and the Supreme Court was very careful. They actually distinguished this for us. They're like, well, look, this is different than the Federal Reserve. Like, everybody's waiting for the Federal Reserve to finally become a part of this conversation. And it's so close to happening, but before it got here, where we're at now, the Supreme Court kind of singled it out, right? They said, well, unlike, you know, the Office of the Inspector General or whatever, the Federal Reserve is uniquely structured, quasi-private entity that follows in the distinct historical tradition of the first and second banks of the United States. And it's a historical tradition in, and the first and second banks of the United States were very different than the Federal Reserve System. And the Federal Reserve System has been in existence in perpetuity since 1913. We didn't really need it before 1913. We were doing pretty well in the country, coming from non-existent into an industrial powerhouse all the way up to the 1913s. And they want to now reform the entire system. Now, the intent that the Federal Reserve retain independence has been reinforced by statutory amendments. Nothing is in the Constitution. 1935, 1977, 2010, blah, blah, blah. Now, the Board of Governors is a 7-member governing body of the Federal Reserve System. They got a chairperson, 6 governors responsible for setting monetary policy and supervising and regulating banks. All right, so you can probably tell my underlining's been pretty bad. So we got a new magic mouse over here, and the problem is sometimes it rotates under me and then I'm squiggling all over the place. So I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. That's just, like I'm not stroking out or anything. The governors, who are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate, serve staggered 14-year terms. And there's nothing that you can do about it, apparently, according to them. Now, the long and staggered term reinforces the independence of the board, which is illegal. An independent Federal Reserve, they say, is essential for a stable economy. And it's always very self-serving with them, as the short-term political interest of the president often clash with sound monetary policy. And I guess the president doesn't have any basis of exercising his authority on monetary policy. They're better judgments than the president? We didn't elect them. So presidents facing pressure to boost the economy may favor lower interest rates and more expansive policy to achieve a temporary economic lift. However, this approach can fuel long-term inflation. Oh no, we don't want long-term inflation. Oh, that would be terrible if we had that. Wouldn't that be horrible? Wow. Good thing we have the Federal Reserve and we have no inflation at all, thanks to them. A politically insulated board of governors can make appropriate, albeit unpopular, decisions like raising interest rates to combat inflation that are crucial for the long-term financial health. Right. Now, the Federal Reserve's effectiveness in managing inflation and economic stability depends on its credibility. Is there managed inflation? Is there economic stability? Things are way more expensive than they were 4 years ago, 2 years ago. What has the Federal Reserve been doing? So if markets and the public believe that the central bank is making decisions based on political pressure, we already believe that, then that confidence erodes. So a lack of credibility can make a central bank's job much harder. For example, if markets anticipate higher inflation, blah, blah, blah. Now, an independent central bank, by contrast, acts predictably, which stabilizes markets and the wider economy. So have we not had any boom or bust cycles? Like, what was that financial crisis back in 2008? What's like the pandemic recession? What's all this? What is all of that if the Federal Reserve is so good at its job? In the few days following Trump's unprecedented action, firing Lisa Cook, a mortgage fraudster, allegedly, media, economists, and academics from across the political spectrum have sounded the alarm that Trump's actions threaten the historic independence of the Federal Reserve. And it's not that historic, okay? It's actually more a part of our history that we did not have the Federal Reserve for a bigger period of time, between 1913 to now, probably, right? All the way back from the founding of the country to 1913. We didn't need a Federal Reserve. There were other dynamics, other banks, and now they created it. This is the same garbage you hear about like abortion. I can't believe they overturned Roe versus Wade. It's been in place for like 60 years or whatever it was, 70 years. And saying that that was a basis for perpetuating an unlawful decision. Same thing here. An independent Federal Reserve also prevents presidential administrations from using monetary policy for self-serving political ends. And if it's unchecked, this could lead to economic collapse and hyperinflation. Oh no. Now, the independence of the Federal Reserve is supported by the law. They say such provisions include the board's funding outside the annual appropriations process, the board's authority to set all terms and condition of the board's exemption from the GAO audit. Okay, they don't get audited at all. Rand Paul screaming about this today too. Shout out to Rand Paul. Audit them. Why can't they get audited? Why are they so independent? You can't even look what they're doing and they can't tell you about it? How is that even lawful? Now, the board's authority to litigate independently, the board's ability to present legislative recommendations and testimony to Congress without executive branch approval, so they're not under the executive branch, the exemption of the board's monetary policy decisions from the Congressional Review Act, Congress can't even do anything about it, and the board's authorization to participate in certain international fora without executive branch intermediation, which is just crazy, man. And I didn't know a lot of that. So the board can go commingle with foreign governments and act on behalf of America's financial well-being without the executive branch facilitating that or having a say in that. Is that democratic, as they keep lecturing us about? One of these statutory devices used to maintain this crucial independence of the Federal Reserve is a removal for cause. You can only fire these people for cause. Now, the act says this, which is illegal. Upon the expiration of the term of any appointive member of the Federal Reserve, the president shall fix the term, and there it is. It's for cause, okay? You can only leave at the end of your term unless sooner removed for cause by the president. So what does for cause mean? Does that mean mortgage fraud? The for cause removal protection, writes Cook's lawyers, which has been the bulwark of their independence, right? You can't fire them, prevents the president from firing them except for cause. And what that means, what is cause? It means inefficiency, it means neglect of duty, and it means malfeasance in office or comparable misconduct. And so it's like, did you read the same list that we read here, you lawyers? She checks the box for every one of these. In a Supreme Court case called 1935, it's called Humphrey's Executor, and we'd love to get that case thrown out. The Supreme Court unanimously upheld the constitutionality of such statutory protections when there are multi-member agencies, okay? It's a bad decision from 1935, kind of in the aftermath of a lot in American history. And they said you can create these independent bodies, essentially. Now, the court found that Congress has the authority to restrict removals depending on the character of the office, which is weird because where does the office live? And where's that in the Constitution? Specifically, for cause removal restrictions were deemed constitutional with respect to officers at the FTC. Remember, they got canned. The court said, well, the FTC's structure is a body of experts and with long standard terms, and it was designed to be nonpartisan. Now, the Supreme Court recently made clear that the analysis in Humphreys applies with particular force to the Federal Reserve. And I don't know that I agree with that. I think that they essentially said, in the case about the president's removal of the NLRB person and the Merit Systems Protection Board, two cases we covered, they got fired, they sued, courts upheld their removals. The court said and permitted the removals to take effect. And you say, well, that's weird. Aren't these like independent bodies? The National Labor Relations Board? How's that different than the Federal Governor's Board or the Merit Systems Protection Board? How's that different? But specifically distinguished Federal Reserve governors, right? The court carved this out because nobody wants to touch the Federal Reserve for some stupid reason. But the court addressed the quasi-private nature of the Federal Reserve and says, well, they're kind of not even a part of the government. And so maybe they can do that, which again is why. Did we create an extra branch of government that's pseudo-private, that's quasi-private? Where the hell is that in the Constitution? And the historical importance for its for-cause removal protections as unique, even among independent agencies. And here's what SCOTUS wrote when they found in favor of Trump in the Wilcox case. They said, Wilcox and Cathy, they say that we have to be removed for cause, just like members of the Federal Reserve Board, right? So these plaintiffs who were suing for wrongful termination said it's basically the same thing as them. Now, we disagree, said the Supreme Court. The Federal Reserve is a uniquely structured quasi-private entity that follows in the distinct historical tradition of the first and second banks of the United States, which we're going to have to zoom in on that. It's what do you mean by that? So what the court was saying, and I think that they're trying to take this too far, is this is distinguishable. The Federal Reserve is a different structure than what you're talking about here. So you can't draw the same parallel. There's a different set of rules that apply to you than to the Federal Reserve. And so if you want to basically drag in this Federal Reserve for cause argument and make that your argument and say, well, look over there, we can't do it. It's not the same. It's apples and oranges. Now, that doesn't mean that we're validating that quasi-private entity yet, but it is a different structure. It is an orange, you're an apple. And so we're not judging oranges right now, but we only have to say you can't say that you're the same because you're not. Now, the government similarly has stated that the Federal Reserve represent a unique institution with a unique history and background. Whatever. What's so unique about it? Came about in 1913. This is not the first time in the Supreme Court where they've distinguished the Federal Reserve. The recent analysis builds on what else they've previously talked about. Now, as Wilcox, the Trump case, makes clear, the Federal Reserve relies uniquely on its independence to function. And so what does for cause mean, right? This is the critical phrase. And the court's going to have to grapple with this. The for cause standard is not even defined in the Federal Reserve Act. Okay? The Congress too lazy to tell us what that means. But statutes establishing the standard for other independent agencies, which are not like the Federal Reserve, as the Supreme Court articulated, that they even admit, it limits cause to the standard that is articulated in Humphrey's Executor. What is for cause? And back then, in the 1930s, they said inefficiency, neglect of duty, or malfeasance in office, which I think probably all of them apply, but they say no. Now, courts and litigants have assumed the standard cases and a little bit more analysis on Humphreys, but the Supreme Court now has not defined what those words mean. All right, so Humphreys defines inefficiency, neglect of duty. What does that mean? So we got to take that definition and ask, what has the Supreme Court said about it? Guess what? Supreme Court has not defined those terms, but historical use of these terms meant failing to perform one's duties in a way that causes harm, specific harm. I think she had a duty to disclose this, and it's caused harm to the credibility and reputation of the Federal Reserve. Thank you. To which the duties were owed. Malfeasance connoted the commission of an unlawful act in the performance of one's official duties. Did she pay a fraudulent mortgage when she was on the federal board because she said, I live here at my primary residence, exacerbating the fraud while she was keeping interest rates high for the rest of us? I would think that that would be unlawful. Inefficiency standard targets concerns waste and other things. And so they just say she doesn't apply. It doesn't apply to her. Now, whether or not this for-cause removal provision is interpreted using the standard of inefficiency, neglect, or malfeasance, it doesn't support removal for policy disagreements, and she's not getting removed for that. Allowing the president to remove members of the board over policy disagreements, that's not the justification for her removal, would render illusory the board's independence and emphasize throughout the statutory provisions that they want Federal Reserve to be independent. Now, as the court's articulation in Humphrey's Executor back in the 1930s makes clear, for cause requires some connection to official conduct. And so prohibiting removal based on an unsubstantiated allegation of private misconduct, which in this case allegedly occurred prior to her Senate confirmation, and she should have disclosed it. She should have revealed it after she got confirmed. And even to the extent that so first of all, she's not denying anything. And again, you could always just unsubstantiated and false allegation also put in there, in which this case allegedly occurred prior to her Senate confirmation. So if you commit crimes and lie on your mortgages before you go into the Federal Reserve where you control mortgage rates, then that's hunky-dory. You're good to go. All right. And to the extent that private misconduct could bear on a particular officer's official conduct in certain cases, you require a factual basis supporting such asserted misconduct. Now, here's the background, some more facts. This is just great. Governor Cook is a distinguished economist with a background in academia and policy and research. And she holds a PhD in economics from Berkeley with a focus on macroeconomics and international economics. And the economists are pretty dumb. They're not really good at anything. She received a BA in philosophy. And as a Marshall Scholar, she received a second BA in philosophy, politics, and economics from Oxford, which is crazy. She's super smart and she can't read a friggin' mortgage document and understand what primary residence is. She must have an IQ of like 180, but she can't understand how to fill out a piece of paper. But thank you for telling us how intelligent she is. Now, prior to her appointment to the board, she was a professor of economics in Michigan and a research associate at Harvard and a national fellow at Stanford and other positions. And she was the senior economist to Obama. She was the senior advisor on the U.S. Treasury Office. I mean, it's a lot. Those are all major institutions, serve for Obama, all the things. Man, she's pretty accomplished. I can't believe she lied on her mortgage. Governor Cook has previously directed the American Economic Association summer program, wow, for disadvantaged students. And then on January 14th, Joe Biden nominated Governor Cook to be a member of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. The Senate confirmed her nomination on May 10th, 2022, where she didn't ever disclose her fraud, even though interest rates are a pretty big part of her job. Now, Governor Cook officially began serving on the Board of Governors, and she filling an unexpired term that ended January 31st, 2024. Then, on May 11th, Biden nominated Cook to the board for an additional 14-year term. Her nomination was confirmed on September 6th, and her term ends in 2038. Okay, so we're stuck with her all the way until then. And this is critical, just so you know. If you remove her, you're a racist, because Governor Cook is the first Black woman to sit on the Federal Reserve's board in its 111-year history. Historic. So don't remove her. Thanks for putting that in there. And they say that a lot. And they didn't actually put the word historic in there. I did. But they should have, because that's what they meant. But Trump has indicated his desire to impede the independence. I don't think that's true. I think he wants the Federal Reserve to do good for America. But they're going to say this is policy, right? This is not for cause. This is the whole section where they're going to say Trump is actually just attacking her, saying Trump has repeatedly chastised the Federal Reserve for refusing to lower interest rates, even posting on Truth Social that they should cut rates by 3 points. He said, bring down the Fed rate now. Then on August 19th, Trump posted on Truth Social, he says, could somebody please inform Jerome Too Late Powell that he is hurting the housing industry very badly? People can't get a mortgage because of him. There is no inflation and every sign is pointing to a major rate cut. Too late is a disaster. Now, as recently as August 26th, just days ago, Trump chastised Powell at a meeting. He said, Jerome Too Late, his nickname is Too Late. He's costing us a lot of money. He's hurting our housing industry. And because of him and his high interest rates, the housing is less than it could be. Not good. Everyone knows. Now, Trump uses the nickname Too Late and that because they say that he's been too slow to lower the interest rates. Oh, thank you for that explanation. Trump has threatened to fire Chairman Powell for being unwilling to cut short-term interests. On August 1st, he said, too late, Powell should just resign, okay? Someone else in Biden's administration resigned. She knew what he was doing wrong, the wrong thing on interest, and he should resign too. They say interest rates only change when a majority of the 12-member Federal Open Market Committee votes to do so. so. I don't know anything about these people. Who are they? Where do they come from? What are their politics? Are they as fair and independent as all the judges that we have around America? Because if so, that's not fair and independent at all. Are they fair and independent like the media or like the government bureaucrats who tell us what they want us to hear? No, we don't trust them. So how about we bring that back into one of the accountable branches of government that is responsive in some way, shape, and form to the people. We don't take it and remove it and like stepstone it one hop away from any type of oversight. The committee consists of the Federal Reserve chairperson. At each open meeting, Cook has joined Powell, of course, and other members in voting not to lower the short-term interest rates. I'm sure she's fair and not partisan, right? And it's only, her thoughts are only about the economics, even though she worked for Obama, Stanford, Harvard, Oxford, and the rest of them. The director of FHA, William Pulte, he now came in, shout out to Bill. The FHFA's stated mission is to ensure the regulated entities fulfill their mission by operating in a safe and sound manner to serve as a reliable source of liquidity and funding for the housing market. Now, since his confirmation, Pulte's been on a tear. Love it. Often through social media postings, using his office to allege mortgage wrongdoing and identifying fraudsters. Now he's turning his sights on Lisa. Each of the director's criminal referrals have notably been, at one time or another, political targets of Trump's ire prior to any mortgage fraud allegations. He just is coming in and looking at the loans. It's not Trump's fault that pencil neck Schiff committed fraud with his mortgages, or Letitia James did the same, or Lisa Cook. If you're a fraudster, no one's above the law. It's not political targeting any more than Joe Biden's raid on Trump was when he raided his house, which of course was a scam. Now, Director Pulte has also parroted President Trump's criticisms of the Federal Reserve. Pulte also said they're hurting the housing markets by being too late and he needs to resign. On July 16th, Pulte reportedly gave Trump a draft letter firing Chairman Powell. Whoa, that's fun. That same day, Pulte posted on X that renovations to the building that houses the Federal Reserve are riddled with fraud. And Trump stated that Chairman Powell may be fired for fraud. I mean, it's possible there's fraud. It's a $2.5 billion renovation. And where'd the money go? On August 15th then, Director Pulte sent a referral letter over to Pam Bondi and Ed Martin, shout out, saying Cook committed fraud. Director Pulte said that Cook claimed 2 different homes as her main residence to obtain better loan terms. Let's see what they say about it. Hopefully they explain it to us. What happened? Notably, this alleged conduct occurred prior to her Senate confirmation. So it's alleged conduct that they're kind of admitting. Like if it happened, it was before she came in. So fraud doesn't count. As long as you get it in before you get your appointment to the Federal Reserve, you're good. Like just get it in quick. Yeah, no, sign all your documents, you're good. Director Pulte publicly released the referral letter and didn't even give notice to Governor Cook. What does she need notice for? She's going to get hopefully an indictment delivered to her. Governor Cook was never given any opportunity to respond to the allegations before the criminal referral was sent. That's not how that works. You can go make your argument, but they don't have to check with you before they submit a criminal referral. You might say it's common courtesy or respect, but she doesn't deserve it because she's a mortgage fraudster. Now, less than 30 minutes after Pulte released the referral letter, Trump posted on Truth, Cook must resign, and Bloomberg, and linked a Bloomberg news story about Pulte's referral to Bondi. Now, 2 days after Pulte released the letter, Trump stated he would fire Cook if she didn't resign. He said, what she did was bad, so I'll fire her if she doesn't resign. We listen to it here. 5 days after Pulte released the referral letter, at approximately 8 p.m. on August 25th, Trump did what he promised. He signed and publicly posted a 2-page letter on True Social firing Cook. We read that one too. Trump did not send a copy of the letter to Cook prior to posting. He provided no advance notice, and she got the notice on Truth, like the rest of us. As justification, Trump cites the Federal Reserve Act, removal for cause. That's all the act says, and the president can remove them for whatever cause the president deems fit. Now, the letter claims if there's cause, the president has determined, by the way, and it's not just for cause, like I think the president, the whole damn agency should live under the executive branch or not exist. So he should be able to fire all of them. There is one president. There's not a president and then Jerome. The letter only referenced to President Trump's cause is supposedly the criminal referral. And Trump even cited that she may have made false statements. And according to Trump, when he said at some point may have, he says, if that's enough, this is unrelated to her official duties. And so it's not even proven yet. And again, this is way bigger than that, right? A lot of the times they'll say, this is the Fannie Willis case, just without the Nathan's hot dog. They say you can only fire Big Fannie if there's actual impropriety, right? Like they actually were caught, whatever. Or is it the appearance of impropriety for that position? If Fannie and her lover are stealing money, going on cruises and prosecuting their political opponents, that impacts the entire office. Same thing's happening here. Her mortgage fraud for somebody who manages interest rates is a pretty big problem. And the appearance of impropriety jeopardizes her position on the board. And according to your own motion, essentially, they're saying the credibility of the Federal Reserve is critical to its functioning. So the claims made in Pulte's referral letter are unsubstantiated unsubstantiated allegations about conduct that predates her Senate confirmation, and she has never been given the opportunity to address them. While you could deny them right now, you still have yet to do that. As Trump announced her termination, he said fraud's not going to be terminated, and Pulte said, "Thanks, Mr. President, for firing her." Now, the following day, Trump was sitting in a cabinet meeting, and he told reporters, we'll listen to this, "If you did your job properly, we wouldn't have problems like Lisa Cook. I think we have to have lower interest rates, yes." When asked about the referral, says, well, she seems to have had an infraction, and she can have an infraction, especially that infraction because she's in charge of, Trump says, if you think about it, mortgages. We need people that are 100% above board. Absolutely right. And it doesn't seem like she was. So even if the president had been more careful in obscuring his real justification, because they say this is just a stepping stone to get Jerome, the unsubstantiated and unproven allegation that she potentially erred in filling out a mortgage form does not amount to cause. Again, not even a rejection that it happened, because they know it happened. The prevailing understanding of for cause has long been anchored, and an unsubstantiated mortgage fraud allegation that allegedly occurred prior to her confirmation doesn't meet the standard. And even if Trump had the authority to remove a board member for cause, which is not defined in the statute, encompassed circumstances, if it was beyond what Humphrey's executors was, Trump doesn't have the power to unilaterally redefine cause, completely unmoored from case law and the rest of the history. Saying certainly a policy dispute between the president and the governor does not constitute cause, and that's not why he fired her. Neither does a specious assertion that a potential crime may have been committed. So, indeed, Trump's conception of cause has no limiting principle. It would allow him to remove any board member with whom he disagrees about policy. First of all, it's not his position. The position has been, we need 100% people on board. They just cited it. That the president says he has found or created some basis for removal does not magically create power for her to remain. Now, in an official statement, a spokesman did not indicate that the Federal Reserve would ignore the president's illegal removal. Instead, they stated that Cook has indicated through her personal attorney that she will promptly challenge this, and they are. We're here now. So if Trump's unlawful attempt to remove her is allowed to take effect, Trump would be able to nominate and his own pick to fill that board, and that term would end in 2038. Yeah, it's clear from the circumstances that this is just a pretext, and Trump wants to just reform the Federal Reserve, and so don't let him do that. They say, here are the counts against Trump and Jerome. They say Cook has a clear entitlement to her position. Trump's letter is not appropriate, doesn't cite appropriate cause for removing her. It's not inefficient negligence or malfeasance, and it's only about a May, so it's all just a little bit too iffy. Violation of the Federal Reserve Act, right? She's got a period, and she's entitled to notice and a hearing, and so some due process claims. Violation of the Fifth Amendment. Due process clauses of the Fifth Amendment. Life, liberty without due process, so she was entitled to a position. It's kind of the same claims that we've seen in the other cases, but this is the Federal Reserve, which is a different entity, as even the Supreme Court said. She neither got notice nor hearing, and so her rights are all being violated. They want the court to come in and do the following. They want a declaration saying Trump cannot fire her and that she is an active member of the board. A declaration that the Board of Governors and the Federal Reserve can only be removed for cause for these reasons, and Trump doesn't have those reasons. A declaration that an unsubstantiated allegation of mortgage fraud prior to her confirmation is not cause, because as long as you get it in, like before the clock expires, you're good. A declaration that Trump's purported firing violated her statutory rights to due process, and an injunction ordering Trump from being stopped so that he cannot continue to do this, all signed by the usual suspects. Norman L. Eisen, Democracy Defenders Fund, who funnels a lot of funds into, anti-Trump causes. They were representing the FBI people and all sorts of stuff. And Abby Lowell over in Washington, D.C., getting another kind of fraudulent Democrat on his client list.